Hi, Wes. Are you ready for another episode of Pastor?
I sure am, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I do appreciate you taking the time. This is a lot of fun for me. I look forward to it each and every week. So thanks again for being here.
Oh, it's great.
Well, Wes, I wondered if we might talk a little bit about...
Ohio State?
Yes. Oh, no. That's not... Is there something you want to share about that?
No. I'm pretty excited, but we need to talk about other things.
Well, I want to talk about pastoral training, kind of the big picture of pastoral training. Just recently, how has it evolved? Maybe in the last, 50 or 100 years, and where we are today. And I wondered if you might share what you've seen, even just in your lifetime, Wes, how pastoral training, how seminary training, residencies, internships, how this has evolved and kind of where we're at in 2024, soon to be 2025. So I guess to lead us off, Wes, I'm curious, at what point did earning an advanced degree, particularly, I guess, a seminary degree, become the standard for pastoral training?
And you're talking mostly in America?
Yeah,
Rob?
I think so, yeah.
It's hard to say definitively, but maybe one marker is when Princeton officially launched its seminary, which was in 1812. A lot of things happened in 1812, but that was one of the significant markers. You say, well, what was going on before that? Well, men were trained in the context of their regular 4-year degrees. So your training was broad, and you were being trained in broad disciplines. You were taking classes in rhetoric, and you were taking classes in the sciences, taking classes in Latin, but it was a broader kind of theological training. And the men that, like Jonathan Edwards, he had a master's degree from Yale, but he had his undergrad from Yale, and all of that would have been broader kind of training. Princeton launched Princeton Theological Seminary in 1812, and Princeton College had been in place. It started out as College of New Jersey in 1746, but it became Princeton College. It was the same school, just changed names. So it had been in operation for, 60 years. And then they launched, in addition to that, Princeton Seminary. So I'm thinking that's a pretty decent date to see when seminary education became its own thing, right in the beginning of the 1800s.
What do you think the idea was for Princeton to go, we need more particular training? Is it just, you're talking about it being broad?
I'm guessing that's what it is because, out of that you get a very, very focused study in the languages, which would be Greek and Hebrew particularly, a little bit Aramaic, because the Old Testament's written in both Hebrew and Aramaic, which is a sort of a form of Hebrew. And Jesus would have spoken in Aramaic. And then you're getting a focus on church history. You're getting a focus on systematic theology. You're getting a focus on at least some of what we might call practical ministries, although the seminaries were not aimed in that direction. They were working at the technical kinds of preparations. So systematics, church history, historical theology, systematic theology, and the biblical languages. That was a core of your seminary curriculums in those days.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners already know, but I want you to maybe help me to understand systematic theology, Wes. How would you define that?
Yeah, so you usually talk about things like theology proper, which is talking about the doctrine of God. The Trinity would be a big part of that. Christology, the doctrine of Christ, his person, his work. Pneumatology, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. Soteriology, the doctrine of sin and grace. And then eschatology became very, very big in the 1900s, which is the doctrine of the last things and how that all works. So you're looking at the Bible and you're pulling together what the Bible teaches on these particular topics. That's systematic theology, as opposed to biblical theology, where you're trying to understand the biblical narratives themselves, both as it's contained in a single book of the Bible and as it runs through the entire length of the Bible. So you're following motifs like the doctrine of sin. You might want to follow that through to see what's going on. Or a better example would be, the covenants and how those covenants, you start with, some would say a covenant of creation, and then you've got the covenant with Noah, then you've got the covenant with Abraham, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You've got the covenant with Moses, the Mosaic covenant, the covenant with David, the Davidic covenant, then that keeps moving right into the new covenant, which is sealed in Christ's blood. So you're following these biblical motifs all the way through with biblical theology. Systematics is more static. You're saying, okay, here's the picture. What's the Bible say about Christ's person? We'll look at all the passages on that. What's the Bible say about Christ's work? We'll look at all the passages about that. I would say that ultimately biblical theology, following these motifs and looking at individual books, is the basis for systematic theology, the resolution of these doctrines.
Thank you. I appreciate you explaining that. So after Princeton launches their seminary, do we start to see seminaries cropping up at other universities?
Yes, we do. In fact, one of the seminaries that I attended just celebrated its 100th anniversary. It cropped up in 1924, Dallas Theological Seminary, and it cropped up because Princeton Seminary had gone what we would call latitudinal. Now, that's different from liberal. It means that they were just open to a wider spectrum of ideas, some of which a lot of the professors at Princeton didn't like. So the professors at Princeton in 1929 went across the river and started Westminster Seminary. Meanwhile, Dallas saw this happening, and they started the seminary in 1924. They thought they'd be the new Princeton. Now, it turned out that Westminster became the new Princeton in 1929, but Dallas just celebrated its 100th anniversary. And so, yeah, lot of seminaries. Southern Seminary started in 1859, right before the Civil War. That was the first Southern Baptist seminary. So, yeah, seminaries starting all over the place, all training men in their denominational particulars, as well as in the standard languages, systematic theology, biblical theologies. There's certain standard parts of the curriculum that all the seminaries would have had.
So would you say, 100, 150 years ago, when a man thought, I feel like I'm being called to becoming a pastor, was it just a given at that point, I've got to go to seminary? Or was it still different ways to do it?
Yeah, I think it would be comparable to going to medical school. In the old days, there weren't medical schools. You went to a 4-year school, you got the same general education, maybe you had a little more emphasis in the sciences, but then you went to apprentice with a doctor. And that's the way you learned to be a doctor. It was the same way for a minister, same way for a lawyer or a banker. That's how it worked. So medical schools sprung up for more depth and a particular focus on all things medicine. So if someone wanted to be a doctor, they would, over the last 100, 200 years, they'd go to a medical school. In fact, they have to these days. Same with a minister. You want to be a minister? Well, this is, if you will, the graduate school. This is the specialized training that you need to become competent in the basic disciplines.
Is that when it became like, if you were applying to be a pastor at a church, a small local church, a large church in a city, in a town, on your resume, so to speak, it needed to say seminary graduate?
Almost across the board. And I would say that's 50 years ago. No, I'm sure there's rural churches where maybe they just didn't have a minister, but the ideal would still be to find a guy that had that kind of training. That's your union card, if you will.
Is that changing?
I think it's changed dramatically. It hasn't been completely thrown out, but there is a much greater willingness to bring men on board without seminary training these days than there ever was. I'd say in the last 50 years, it's changed pretty radically.
Yeah. Why do you think that's happened?
Well, there's at least two factors, I'd say, Rob. One is that there's a realization that there's more to being a successful pastor than having a certain set of technical skills or a certain knowledge base. I would say that's one piece. And I think there's truth. There's real truth to that. There's no question about that. I would say a second thing is that we don't value education the way we used to. And the pastors today are the least educated that they've ever been in the history of America. And I think that shows a general deterioration in education and a general deterioration in our valuing of education. And, I taught college for 4 years. I can say a little bit about what I saw when I was there. We're not nearly as literate as we were in colonial times. America's literacy is way down. Now, we've lowered the bar, so we want to act like everybody's literate, but the truth of the matter is we're the dumbest we've ever been. We know a lot about world affairs because of the internet, but we're not a well-educated people, and that probably sounds a little harsh, but there's very good ways to quantify that, to document that in terms of our ability to be able to read. The curriculums across the board are far less rigorous than they used to be.
Do you think that goes for doctors and lawyers? Are doctors and lawyers today less educated than they were 50 or 100 years ago?
Yeah, probably not for doctors and lawyers. For sure not doctors. In fact, it's even more intense. And lawsuits probably, they're all working together. The liability of it, I know the guy that did my surgery on my eye for my retina detachment. He had medical school. I think he had 10 years post-medical school before he was certified to be a retina surgeon. So, yeah, not across the board, but generally educationally in the non-specialization areas like that, and certainly in seminary, the bar's way down.
So why didn't training to be a pastor follow along with training to be a lawyer or training to be a doctor?
Well,
why did it get dumbed down for them?
That's kind of $1 million question. I'd ask it this way. If caring for your body requires such intense and even prolonged training, if caring for your eyeball requires such intense training, why doesn't caring for your soul require that same intense training? And I don't have a good answer for that. I obviously don't see it that way. I don't think that it should be that it doesn't. That doesn't seem to be a logical answer from any angle that I approach it. But that's where we are right now.
Going back to something you said, there's more to becoming a pastor, to be an educated, trained pastor than the technical. What are you referring to beyond the technical?
That's a great question, Rob. That is really a good question. Leadership is one of those, it's hard to get a handle on it. What is good leadership? Communication. I know we're going to be talking about it sometime in the future. What constitutes good communication? What constitutes the ability to counsel and shepherd well, which has a leadership piece, it has a communications piece, it has a people piece. What constitutes understanding people? These are really not things that seminaries can really do much for. And let me be clear, Rob, I am pro-seminary. I believe in seminaries. We don't let anybody come into the NETS program currently, and we haven't for the last 24 years, that doesn't have a seminary education. And several of our guys have come in with PhDs. So I believe in it. I think the technical side, I want them going to medical school. I want them doing a residency program like the medical schools make them do. I think we need to be expert physicians of the soul and know all the tools of the trade. But there's just some things seminaries just can't do. And those would be some examples.
So you think it's a bit out of vogue? Seminary's a bit out of vogue today. Would you say that? I know you spent a lot of time on seminary campuses that got great student body. There's a lot of people going, but is it a little out of vogue right now?
That's a broad statement, but I generally would say yes. And I think that one statistic that if I knew the statistic would prove it, I'm suspicious that there are less seminary-trained pastors today in pulpits throughout America than there's ever been, and by a fairly large disparity. And the other thing that tells me that it's out of vogue is the way the seminaries, at least in some traditions, continue to lower the standards. Seminaries are now almost a little desperate to have people come to their seminaries and study. And the whole online education scenario has promoted that. People are staying at home. Now, I think there's some positives to that. So it's not a bad versus good. You can't say it just in those terms. But seminaries are doing everything they can to lure people to come, which means a huge diversification of degrees. So they're offering a lot more degrees. Everything's sort of tailor-made to be like you're going into a restaurant and being able to say, I don't want this pickle. Real particularity is allowed. And in general, getting a degree in many of the seminaries is easier today than it's ever been. I'll give you an example just from my background with Dallas Seminary. Now, Dallas Seminary doesn't have an MDiv program, it has a THM program. But when you used to go to Dallas Seminary, when they first started, you had to take, so it was a 4-year program. THM was a 4-year program. MDiv's a 3-year program. You had to take 8 semesters of Greek. So every single semester you were there, and 6 semesters of Hebrew. By the time I got there in 1985, they'd already lowered it to 6 semesters of Greek and 4 semesters of Hebrew. All the seminaries have generally moved to an easier curriculum, and some of them dramatically so. And so I think people just don't want to go through the rigor that they have to go through. And so the seminaries have accommodated them, and the churches have accommodated them by saying, we're not even requiring a seminary degree.
What do you think the results are of less seminary-trained pastors at pulpits across America? What's the result of that, in your opinion?
I mean, I don't see how you can not conclude that it's harmful to the church. You have men, in any other discipline, in any other field, if you had less trained people administering that trade, administering that field, the field would suffer. How can it be different within the church? If you know less about church history, if you know less about systematic theology, if you know less about the biblical languages, and you're standing up and informing your people about what's true and helping them understand how this applies to their lives, there has to be an impact. So my assessment is I don't see how you can conclude otherwise. You just can't.
It's kind of gone the way of a lot of education. We've heard a theme over the last several years that college just isn't worth what it used to be. It's not necessary. And maybe it's a part of that movement, a little bit part of that kind of idea. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it is. Bill Gates didn't graduate from college. Steve Jobs didn't graduate from college. Michael Dell didn't graduate from college. You can obviously be very successful and never go to college or never graduate from college. So I think there is an appreciation that some of the things that are necessary to be successful in the pastorate cannot be got at a seminary. And I think that's true.
Okay, so how do you get those other things that you were talking about? Is that an apprenticeship? Is that a residency? What's the difference between those two, by the way? I don't know.
Yeah, they're not really different. I think they're synonyms. Well, the typical way that seminary grads have traditionally gotten those things is through the informal apprenticeship of an associate pastorate position in a church. Or even worse, I say worse because you get thrown into the deep end of the pool, you take a lead pastor, a senior pastorate, right out of the chute. And it's kind of a baptism by fire. Because in general, you could summarize all of these soft skills, let's call them that, as having to do with people and leading people and communicating with people and understanding people. So you do learn it that way, but it can be kind of abrupt. It can be abrupt both for the church and for the pastor, because suddenly he's up there waxing eloquent with his sermons and realizing he's completely disconnected from his congregation. He thinks, well, I really prepared a fine sermon today, and maybe it was, and maybe he even delivered it well, but he hasn't understood the relational dynamic of his church. I frankly think that was part of Jonathan Edwards' problem. And I'm a Jonathan Edwards devotee. I'm a sycophant. Whatever word you want to use, it says, I think the guy's fantastic. But I know enough about the history to know that he pulled a couple of bonehead moves there that didn't really understand the dynamic with people. So you can learn them through just jumping into the deep end of the pool. Another way to try to learn some of those is through some sort of a residency program, some sort of an apprenticeship program, which is really a throwback to the pre-seminary days. Interestingly enough, there's nothing new under the sun. Residency programs or apprenticeships are not new. They were tried and true for all of colonial America and, most of the first century of America.
Was there a period where that was not common? Apprenticeships were not common 25, 50 years ago? I don't.
Not in the formal sense. I think if you went and you were an associate pastor with a senior pastor, depending on the senior pastor, that was at least an informal apprenticeship. And if the senior pastor was really conscientious, it could have been brought into a much more formal kind of an apprenticeship. But it was not a standalone kind of arrangement like we're seeing today. There has been a huge uptick with apprenticeship programs. I've got a little anecdote on that, Rob, if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I started NETS, which is a full-blown residency program, this is coming up on 25 years ago, I got tremendous resistance from some of the denominational heads that I was dealing with. Their basic response was, this person's just been through seminary. He's trained. He doesn't need this program, and this program is expensive, and it's time-consuming. Who's going to want to do this after they've already spent all this time going through seminary? And I heard all that, but I thought, well, I don't know anything about that. I just know it's needed. It's clear to me it's needed. So we soldiered along with it, and probably about 10 years ago, I got asked to attend a think tank by the same denomination. And the think tank was on residency programs. This same group that really, at least in the local manifestation of leadership, was kind of against it. Now they're having a think tank on it at headquarters. So I flew down, spent the week with the think tank. I was kind of the godfather because I had started one earlier than anybody else had, and we had actually seen some fruit from it. We'd learned some things. We'd made some mistakes. By the end of the week, the head leader of this whole thing declared that they were going to hire a vice president for residency programs, and they wanted to see 100 residency programs started like in the next 5 years. See, I think that the realization that what seminary does, as helpful as it is, the realization that it was still falling short was beginning to get some traction. And I saw this in, my church affiliated with 2 denominations in one of the denominations. And now in the other denomination, just recently, like within maybe the last 10 years, they have made a tremendous move toward trying to help churches establish residency programs. And I'm getting called from senior pastors who say, hey, you've been doing this a while. Come down and talk to us about how we might do that. And these are big churches, mega churches, have lots of money, and they want to invest their money in residency programs. And again, it's a realization that it falls short. Seminary doesn't do everything you need, and now we're sort of embracing the whole kit and caboodle.
Is there a chance that the residencies have done such a good job, or maybe been so popular, there's been such a hard push for them, that it's maybe we don't really need to go to seminary? What if we could just hit a residency?
There are some that advocate that. Some very highly respected people would advocate that very explicitly. I disagree with that because, especially with the languages, it'd be very difficult to replicate what the seminaries are capable of doing in the languages. When you got guys like at Southern Seminary, like, Tom Schreiner and Brian Vickers and some of the other guys that are there. I don't know all the guys in the Greek department now. These guys' ability to teach you how to follow the flow of an argument in a book, not just the rudiments of Koine Greek, but how to then apply that. Or, the guys in the Old Testament in these schools doing the same thing with biblical Hebrew. It's very difficult in a local church to replicate that. I think they're limited. I think it's difficult to really thoroughly cover church history. I have found in general that guys graduating from seminary do not know their church history. And I got schooled in church history when I was at Dallas Seminary. And even systematics. I mean, if you're interested in that, you'll take the courses. But to really go through the rigor and combine systematics with historical theology so you see how these doctrines developed over the last 2,000 years, I just think that's hard to do just simply in a local church. But I do think that's become real popular. Well, my church has a residency program, so that is fairly popular.
What do you see as maybe some of the advantages of online for guys going through seminary. The technology is making it more possible than ever. I mean, it is completely possible. It's a totally different experience. COVID advanced all of this so much.
It really did.
Yeah. I mean, what are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on it? I mean, there's got to be some good things about it.
Yeah, I think not dislocating a family. Let's say it's a husband married with a couple of kids. He can stay involved with his local church. There's probably an informal kind of residency program going on there. Pastors giving him opportunities to preach, opportunities to lead different things, so he can get some of the technical expertise without disrupting the whole family. Now, he's still not there. He can't go to lunch with the professors, but he's getting a good church-based experience while adding some of these technical tools in his tool belt. So I see that as an advantage.
Some people think, Wes, you're a bit of a old-fashioned kind of guy. I actually think you're a pretty forward thinker, pretty modern in your thinking. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done to react to this, to offer an opportunity for guys that are doing their seminary online? Because as you've talked about in this episode, you can't just have one and not have the other. How do you have them both? How do we meet men where they're at today and take advantage of the technology, but not skimp on what they really need to know to be effective pastors?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one I've devoted a fair amount of time to, and I'm still thinking about it and considering it, because these are unique times. There's no question about that. With what the technology gives us, we've never had this kind of scenario before. So we're trying to take the best of both worlds. We call it our MDiv program, if I can put a name on it. And the best of both worlds is have people be in a vibrant church setting, and particularly a missional church setting. And by that, I mean a church that is committed to and successful in planting other churches. I say it that way because when I look at the Great Commission, based on how it played itself out in the book of Acts, that's what they did. They planted churches. And so that to me is sort of ground zero for what being missional means. And so we're trying to set up a program where guys can come and do it very economically and be a part of a church like that, where they're also given opportunities to minister in a significant way. Because a lot of times at seminary, you're in seminary churches and you don't have much opportunity to minister because those churches are loaded. They're loaded with staff. They're loaded with faculty members from the seminary. It's very difficult to ever think about preaching on a Sunday morning.
It's a pretty deep bench.
It's a deep bench, and guys just accept that. But we're saying, come here. We're going to give you some opportunities to really flex your muscles a little bit. But we're also going to provide a scenario where you can continue your education. In fact, we're going to insist on you continuing your education with the seminary, and we're going to work with that seminary and work with that curriculum. And if there's some areas we can supplement or strengthen that aren't necessarily required in the program, we're going to do that. For instance, no master's degree of divinity requires that you read Jonathan Edwards. If you're going to read Jonathan Edwards or John Owen, you're going to do that as an elective. So they're getting their basic skills, and we're saying, we want you to do this. Or there's a lot of programs, they don't require much depth in the biblical languages. We're saying, well, we're going to supplement that. We're going to add some things to that. We're not going to poo-poo what you're doing. We want you to finish that degree because we can't replicate that, not easily. But we're also going to add to that. So there's going to be a combination of you growing academically and growing practically in ministry skills over this 3 to 4 year period. And we're going to really spice it up by saying, we're frankly going to give you close to free housing. You come up to our program, we're going to save you $40,000 to $50,000 on housing. So you're getting a missional church experience. You're getting to do some reps with things you may not be able to do in even your home church. It's not dislocating because you're staying here for a 3 to 4 year period. So there's some continuity, and you're getting your seminary training as well. So we're combining a residency with a Master's of Divinity program. We call it our Residiv program. That's our attempt to just take advantage and work with the situation as it exists today.
And it sounds, what you've got going here is you've got the residency and the seminary training working side by side. It's parallel. It's happening parallel versus I've got to finish that.
It's integrated. That's right, Rob.
It's a twofer. I'm getting them done together.
You're getting them done together, and the one is feeding off the other. That's what I mean by integrated. So there's nothing you're studying in the academic setting that we're not then saying, here's the relevance of that. For instance, I'll give you an example. We've got 3 guys in the Residiv program this year. So we're translating through the book of 2 Thessalonians right now. Now, they're in their first year of Greek, so they can't translate yet. But what I can help them to see as we look at the translation is why this matters. Because, you go through that, you may just think this is an awful lot of work. But we're showing them why it matters, because in 2 Thessalonians, from verse 3 to verse 12 of chapter 1, it's all one sentence in the Greek. When you look at English translations, it's broken up into 4 or 5 sentences. And what happens is you lose the connections. So you can't see how this phrase relates to the phrase that went before it, because it starts it off with a new sentence. So they look like they're all just coordinate ideas, all equal ideas. But if you know the Greek, you can say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, no, this looks like a subordinate idea. This idea is supporting that idea. This is the main idea. This is a subordinate modifying clause. And so we're helping them to see, here's why this is important. What you're learning in this first year Greek class, here's how it plays out. This is how the sausage is made, but this is the meal then you're able to serve up to your congregation because you've understood how the sausage is made. So it's integrated like that, and very tightly so.
And I imagine taking your first year of Greek online by yourself, you're logging in at night after
boring.
Put the kids down of it. So this might be a little less daunting, and not just that, a little more inspiring.
Very motivational, sure.
You're sitting around a table with a bunch of like-minded guys.
Yes, and you're able to see the upshot of it. Here's why it matters. I think people are motivated to discipline themselves when they value something. And so we're trying to help them to see why this is valuable.
So would you say it's a little bit of a study group as well, that you're getting a built-in study group?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, you could say that. It's a study group. So the guy that is doing that for us, one of our mentors, Caleb Abernathy, was helping the guys. They're just learning about the subjunctive mood with Greek verbs. And there was some subjunctives in our passage in 2 Thess. And he was saying, see, here it is. And it's just kind of, oh, we just learned about that. And here's when it applies. So absolutely, it's a study group. It's band of brothers. I mean, there's all kinds of things about it that are just fun. If
Caleb ever needs some help with that, have him reach out to me, because I could probably take over for him.
You can spell the word Greek?
Almost.
Almost, yeah. There's 2 E's.
There you
Just
go.
remember that.
The practical component, we were talking about, the study group idea, having this group of guys to kind of stay motivated. But talk to me a little bit about the practical opportunities, because I think they're going to be part of a church plant, part of seeing how that all happens and being on the ground floor of it. And they're not going to need to beg for an opportunity to serve, I imagine.
No, they're not. Again, there are a lot of good situations out there. So I want to say that, lest I'm acting like this is the best. But there are some real strengths to the NETS Residiv program. And here's one of the biggest. So we are planting another church, Christ Memorial Church, a church I planted a daughter church about 20 years ago. We're planting another daughter church. So these are churches in the area next fall. So you've now got 3 churches. You've got the church plant, you've got the church that was planted 20 years ago, and you've got the church that was planted about 35 years ago. All at different stages. The church plant, they're just in survival mode, probably renting facilities and, church in a box kind of a thing. That's just laden with opportunities to preach, opportunities to serve in every single capacity. And then you got a church that was planted, 20 years ago, not quite. They've not launched a church yet, but they're eager and ready to do that, or to send out a man who would be a church revitalizer. So they're at a little different stage. And then you've got Christ Memorial Church, which has launched several church plants, sent out many men to revitalize, have really launched a church planting movement that includes ministry in Cameroon and United Arab Emirates. So these guys get to have exposure to all of that. The way we're looking at it right now is they'd be involved in the church plant during the year because we have a campus ministry there. But then during the summer, we'd deploy them to the other two churches the first year. Then the second year, we'd flip and deploy them to the other church and let them work the whole summer. So they're seeing how the sausage is being made, and then they're seeing what it looks like when it's 20 years into it, 35 years into it, which motivates them to say, okay, this looks pretty chaotic here, but hang in there. The meal's going to be pretty tasty once we get it up and running. So I think I don't know that it's a unique experience, but it's rare because all of these churches are within, 40 minutes of each other. So it's all very doable while they live on our campus for practically no rent, very low rent. So I'm pretty excited about that, Rob.
Yeah, and they're also, because NET's core program is a full-blown, what we could just call a residency, seminary grads. So they're also rubbing shoulders with these seminary grads, fresh seminary grads.
That's right. The traditional residency program or seminary grads. So they've been there, done that. You've got a big brother kind of a thing. Plus, the guys that are mentoring in that are all seminary grads. Some of us have advanced degrees beyond just the regular master's degree. So you've got a lot of experience and a lot of education in the room. You really do.
Well, NET's focus is primarily on revitalizing and church planting in New England. I know there's an international component as well, but generally speaking, stateside, it's New England. These guys that are coming, maybe start with the first three guys that you've got right now, is the idea that they are going to minister in New England, in the Northeast? Is that what?
Yes. We would ask of anyone that wanted to be a part of our ResDiv program, the same thing we ask of anyone that's a part of our traditional residency program, and that is that New England be a genuine ministry option. You don't have to sign in blood, but we're asking you to be willing to say, I will seriously consider this as an option. If someone's coming up and saying, I know I want to go back to Louisiana, our response is, we respect that. This is probably not the most helpful thing for you. But if someone's like, yeah, I'm open to the Northeast, because New York and New Jersey is clearly in that same unreached people group category, we're all in on that. So we're willing to roll the dice with them and see where God leads.
And you think it's a 2 to 3 year program?
If they only have 1 year left, we wouldn't invite them into the ResDiv program. But if they have 2 or more years left, then we'd invite them in. And they could be here from 2 to 4 years.
Would you invite a guy to the residency program who got his seminary degree completely online? Say, it's already done. I graduated from seminary, took it all online. Now I want a residency. Can I look at NETs?
Yes, absolutely. That's our traditional. We're not discriminating on the basis of whether you did it online or did it in person. We don't have any trouble saying we think as far as the education on those, what we would call the hard skills, the technical skills, we think being in person is better. But there is a disruption to it that not everybody can handle.
Wes, as we close this out, and this is exciting. It's a neat program. It's a neat idea. I wondered if you just might talk about the component for the wives, because I think that is another particularly, we try to be careful with the word unique, but it's a bit unique that the residency program, this ResDiv program even, has a component for the wives. What is that component? What does that look like for the wife?
First, Rob, just the underpinning of it, why do we have that? I think one of the biggest challenges to staying in the ministry long term is really having a husband and wife that are on the same page, which obviously at least means having a husband and wife who are happily married, who are married successfully. In other words, the marriage is working. So, we're trying to help the husband to pass the happy wife test, and we're trying to help the wife pass the happy pastor's wife test, because ministry puts a lot of pressure on a family. Church planting puts a lot of pressure on a family. Revitalizing a church that has really diminished to almost nothing, that's a lot of pressure on a family, a lot of pressure on a marriage. And so we're working hard first to make sure that this couple is on a good footing. But secondly, we're working, especially with the wives track, to equip the wives to be good pastors' wives and or good ministry partners. We do distinguish those two things. But, a lot of times if you go into a church plant, the pastor's wife is the de facto women's ministry leader or coordinator. So having some theological grounding. So we make all the ladies read some stuff from Edwards, for instance. Having some counseling grounding, having some presentational skill development, having some ability to do a strategic plan. Sue's got a great exercise where she has the women do a strategic plan for accomplishing laundry. Now, that might sound a little sexist. It's not meant to do that. She's taking something that all women view as part of their job. In most cases, that's the way households work. But she's saying, let's come up with a strategic plan for this. What is our vision? What are the objectives to accomplish that vision? And then what's the tactical plan, the action steps to accomplish each of those objectives? Now, I do strategic plans with the guys in our leadership track. What's the strategic plan for the church? What's the strategic plan for ministry? What's the strategic plan for your elders, your leaders? All of those things are a part of good leadership. And now we're teaching the women to do that in the realm. So what's your strategic plan for launching a women's outreach event? Come up with a plan. Don't just shoot from the hip. So all of that is designed to make the pastors pass the happy wife test, make the wives pass the happy pastor's wife test. When you interview Sue the next time, you're going to find out she's loved being a pastor's wife, and she's loved her church. And that's not because everything's come up roses. There's been plenty of hardship over the 3 decades that we pastored, but she's a happy pastor's wife, and we're trying to pass that on and make sure that they're really in sync with one another.
And on top of all that, I can imagine there's just a ton of just relational things going on because they're all living on this campus, and there's a huge playground there. The kids are playing, the wives get to talk. As we close, Wes, can you I know you are very proud of the campus, and you should be, and people have worked very, very hard, and so many have given money and time and effort from all over the country, churches from everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about the campus? What does it look like? Where is it? And then we'll wrap it up.
It's a beautiful campus in a beautiful setting. It's kind of tucked up right up against the Green Mountains. In fact, if you go to the top of our campus and look straight out, the whole campus is the backdrop is Mount Mansfield, which right now is drop dead gorgeous because it snowed on Mount Mansfield and it hasn't snowed down where we are yet. So it's breathtaking. It's a breathtaking view. And we've done a lot of renovations. There were 3 dorms when we bought the campus. We've converted 1 dorm entirely into apartments. We've converted the other 2 dorms partially into apartments. And this summer, we renovated the academic building. And we are within a hair's breadth of finishing that. Our target date was to finish it on Thanksgiving. That was our target date. It is beautiful. It is beautiful. We got a beautiful library. Our campus director built all the bookshelves himself. We've got a beautiful study room that can have study carols for up to 20 residents or interns. We've got a state-of-the-art office complex for all of our staff, at a state-of-the-art conference and classrooms with all of the bells and whistles, all of the technology. Everything's wired in there beautifully. We essentially gutted the building. Nice break rooms. We've got a podcast studio that is almost completed with all the soundboard and insulation. I just was in it last night because I was over there working yesterday, and I just couldn't believe how cool it looks in there. I mean, even if it wasn't for all the high-tech stuff, that it just looks cool with that special
acoustic foam.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's just really been very, very well done. And we've had churches almost exclusively east of the Mississippi, but I bet we've had 20 to 30 churches that have sent missions teams up that have been very, very helpful. We've had some Texas churches too, so that's obviously west of the Mississippi, but mostly in the South, in New England. God's been very gracious to us. And so, yeah, the campus, state-of-the-art gymnasium. It's one of the nicest gyms in the state of Vermont, climate controlled. It's a beautiful gymnasium. All these things were there. We're just improving them.
Yeah, a weight room in the gymnasium.
But weight room, all the exercise equipment, all that stuff was there when we bought the campus. Campus completely paid for. So Nets operates on a very conservative financial plan. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful place. It really is.
This is so neat. I appreciate you taking the time to lay out this program, but really in a bigger picture, just talk a little bit about pastors' training opportunities today. It's more than ever. We can see the evolution of it. There's some good, there's some bad, but I'm excited that not just Nets, but others out across the country and really probably all over the world are really trying to take advantage of technology to train pastors up so they can be great shepherds of their flocks.
Yeah, I think there's a time right now, our partnership with the seminaries, that partnership has, in my mind, never been richer, and the opportunities have never been greater to just use all the resources that we've got to prepare men to send them out to preach the gospel and see if God might be pleased to light things up again with another awakening.
Well, Wes, thanks again. I appreciate your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
To learn more about the Net Center for Church Planning and Revitalization's training and sending programs, visit us online at thenetcenter.org. For questions or comments, email us at pastorpastor@thenetcenter.org. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and consider sharing this episode with a friend. This podcast is a production of the Net Center for Church Planning and Revitalization. Nets, for the life of the church.